And issue number 17 in big bold letters said no men and women's sports. I would crack up watching him on the campaign trail. You know, when he was directly asked, people would ask him, how are you going to fix this issue? And he would almost kind of grimace or laugh because, again, it's kind of like a South Park episode, the visual of it, or like a Babylon Bee headline or an SNL skit. And he would just say, I'm going to ban it emphatically. And that's the type of leadership and moral clarity that we need. He has vowed on day one in office, he will reinforce and uphold Title IX's original intent.
Welcome to a special weekend episode of Spark the Conversation. This is your host, Mark the Spark. And today we're going to be talking about none other than the heroine of female sports, Riley Gaines. I thank you for joining on this special weekend episode today. We've been putting out a daily post for the 5 days of the week of the news covering some of the topics that have come up, putting out clips that are pretty interesting. So if you're interested in looking at some the hot topic clips of the day, this is a good channel to follow. And it's just a one-man operation. So I appreciate likes, follows, subscriptions, shares. All those are a big help. And we're doing constant upgrades here. So if you think you notice something, let me know. Also, looking for any kind of interviews. I'd like to get some interviews in here to actually spark some conversations. So if you know some politically minded people who are willing to have a conversation, be definitely interested in getting that going here as well. Today's topic, I was inspired because there's a recent commercial that came out. I'm not sure if you saw it or not, from a fairly new athletic company who is kind of an activist. Usually we use that term in a negative way, but this one is more positive. They are activists for protecting female sports and female spaces, which, you know, is kind of crazy because a couple of years ago, or even now, if you phrase that differently, I'd be like, I don't really care for the whole feminism thing. But in this case, it's not even like feminism. This is like almost back to first wave feminism again, where we're just trying to, you know, have level playing fields. So it's, I guess things are always cyclical, right? But this is protecting women's sports and women's spaces from men who are pretending that they're women or think that they're women, whether that's a legitimate thought or not, it doesn't really matter, to try to take, you know, they take competitions, they take trophies, they take even like records. There's, you know, being recorded as going faster and lifting more weight and all these crazy things in women's sports. And these are just like, I don't know, barely mediocre men in their, you know, playing against other men in that sport. And they, I don't know, they think that they should be playing against women for some reason, or they have no sense of pride, no sense of chivalry, that they can just go in a women's space. I think this is actually kind of a point in, you know, the lack of masculinity in this country. We've destroyed the positive nature behind masculinity, made it all negative, and now there's no shame in pretending that you're a woman or not being masculine as a man, which what's less masculine than pretending you're a woman and competing against women in their sports? I mean, it's unreal. I think of that boxing match that was in the this last Olympics, and I'm pretty sure the female was an Italian boxer. I can't remember who the guy was who was pretending he was a female, and just absolutely obliterated. And I showed that clip in one of my previous episodes this week, but absolutely obliterated the female competitor, and that was allowed in the Olympics. I mean, the highest level of sports in the world. So it's not just the United States, but we can see now with President Trump in office, with a strong leader in office in the United States, it makes a huge difference in the whole world's mindset on how we perceive reality and how we have like a moral guidance and a structure. So just having that president, the highest position in the world, I don't care what you think, he is clearly, because you can see now with having a good, strong president in command, in office, that it's changed the whole world. Some of these, like the Olympics, I'm pretty sure you're going to see it there. Them change their standard. You've already seen the NCAA has capitulated and said, we are going to follow the guidance of the federal government in protecting women's sports and having women only in women's sports, which just seems like common sense, but clearly is not to some. But anyways, Riley Gaines was one of the first females who stood up against this lunacy of men competing in women's sports. And so I just want to give you a brief rundown of Riley Gaines. So she's 12-time All-Olympic swimmer with 5 SEC titles. And she swam at University of Kentucky, and she originally planned to pursue a dental degree. And she talks about this in a lot of her interviews, that this was her original plan. But then she realized quickly, within, this problem that was showing up in the swimming world of the NCAA college level sports, she realized that this needed to be addressed. And she talks about it a little bit. I'm going to play a bunch of clips of different interviews just so we can see like the progression of Riley Gaines and how she came to be such a force within this movement, which just, like I said, seems simple, seems common sense, but we have a whole side of this country, probably, well, at least 20% of this country that doesn't have any kind of common sense guidance. They just kind of go based on their feelings, right? So she started first focusing on this issue in 2022 when she was forced to swim against male Leah Thomas, which Leah's his name that he changed it to when he tried pretending to be a woman, in the NCAA Women's Swimming Championship. So the uneven challenge was made even more traumatic when the NCAA officials insisted on giving Leah Thomas the trophy, despite tying Riley down to the 100th of a second, which is almost unbelievable that they could come down to this tie. And so Riley often mentions, in a lot of these interviews, she has mentioned that she was waiting for somebody else to stand up for them. She was waiting for either a parent or a coach or some person in a leadership position to stand up for the rights of these girls. And there came to a point, this championship was when she realized that nobody was coming. Nobody was coming. Nobody was going to help. Everybody was, staying in their own corner and afraid to speak up. And you're going to see some of the moves that she makes really show why I call her the heroine of modern female sports. Because for every story needs a hero. And in this story, Riley Gaines is that hero. And the reason why I say that is because she took a huge risk. Okay? As heroes in stories often do, they take a huge risk to take a stand because what they have to do what they believe is right. And that's what Riley Gaines did here. She took a stand doing what she believed was the right thing to do. And that risk paid off for her in big measures. And, a lot of times too, the hero of the story is the person who not only takes the risk, but takes the risk not to benefit themselves. It's not like a business venture. She took the risk based on a deep down held belief that a wrong was being committed. She saw the wrong that was being committed and she couldn't stand by. In the self-defense world, it's often discussed about high responders and low responders. And in a situation that's dangerous to yourself or others, you quickly find out which one you are. We're high responders, and this can happen in medical emergencies too. They don't really think much before they react. They've already decided before the situation happened that they would react to such a situation, and they react. And then there's low responders who sometimes freeze up, sometimes run away. And there's some middle ground there too, but typically you're one or the other. Well, I think it's pretty clear which side Riley Gaines falls on. She is a high responder. And when she saw that there was a wrong being committed, she responded in the best way she could to try to right that wrong. So that's why I call her the heroine of modern female sports. So the first clip I'm going to play is actually the whole commercial for this XXXY athletic apparel brand. And this commercial hits.
Sia Leahy are in hot water over their transphobic comments, and I just gotta say, who cares if biological males play in women's sports? Just be inclusive.
Could not agree more. This is just a bunch of fear-mongering from right-wing bigots.
Gonna say it, she's a bigot.
She's been a massive distraction from her team with her hate-filled rhetoric. Sia is not inclusive. And males invading women's sports isn't even a problem, as far as I'm concerned.
These female athletes just need to work harder.
And not blame others for their lack of success. As the captain, Sia is very much responsible for these boycotts, which have cost her team a playoff bid.
Guess we'll see how Sia handles all that pressure tonight.
Wow. So that does hit different, doesn't it? I mean, it's amazing, incredible how theatrics and cinematography and just the right backtrack sound can really enhance a video. But I don't know, whoever did this, they deserve a big payday. I think this is a pretty small athletics company, this XXXY, because they haven't been going for that long, but there's probably a lot of people buying their stuff who believe in the politics of it. I know I've definitely considered it, and I may even still go out and buy something. Of course, I have so many shirts that I don't know what to do with already, but it's one of those things I might just go out and do it just to support a cause. But the point is there that women's sports need to be protected, and it's shown. There's a few other female athletes now at Riley Gaines' level that have been inspired by Riley's strength and ability to stand up and show that this is not right. And, you know, Riley points out in some of these interviews too, that, you know, when she thought that somebody was going to come and stand up for them, a coach or a parent or something like that, it didn't happen. She realized at that point that it had to come from her. It had to come from somebody who was affected. And I think that was a very good perception on her part, because in reality, if a coach stood up and said something, if a parent stood up and said something, it probably wouldn't have hit as hard. It wouldn't have had the same effect as from the victim. Ultimately, I mean, she was a victim. She just doesn't act like a victim, which I think is very key in protecting your ability to, stand up for what's right. Because when you have that victim mentality, people tend to kind of ignore it a little bit or question your true victimhood. The true victims are the ones who stand up and fight, right? And they're the ones who are the most effective in resolving the issue that they were victimized by. And her strength, I mean, it's just her visible strength as she talks and as she acts and holds herself is what made this whole movement so successful. And like I said, had this come from somebody else, I don't think it would have been as effective as it was coming from her and some of her teammates and other girls in other areas of female sports, which is what has happened now, now that she's led the charge, which is just great. So this first clip is Fox News interview that she did in 2023. And it just kind of gives you the story of, you know, the race, the day of the race, and, you know, some of her thoughts and feelings behind it and how it went.
My name is Riley Gaines. This past year, I recently graduated from the University of Kentucky, where I was on the women's swim and dive team all 4 years of my collegiate career. I grew up here in Nashville, Tennessee. I started swimming at the age of 4, so I've dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport. Dedicated 18 years of my life to achieving maximum performance. So of course this means in your sport-specific training, in the weight room, your sleep schedule, your diet, your physical rehabilitation. There's so much that goes into competing at the highest level. I was extremely fortunate to be heavily recruited. Ultimately, I chose the University of Kentucky, where I had a phenomenal experience. Transitioning to college, that I thought I had worked hard my entire life, but that was a whole new level of working hard. My sophomore year, we came back. I was having this breakout season. In March of 2020, that's when our NCAA championships were supposed to be. About 3 days before we were supposed to leave, COVID hit. And of course, it took the US by storm, and our NCAA championships got canceled. When we were told we were being sent home, it was a really scary feeling. Of course, pools were closed, gyms were closed. There was no way really to continue improving in your sport, which is a scary thought when you know you're eventually going to have to come back and compete. So I'm very fortunate that, like I said, I'm from Tennessee, where there's an abundance of lakes. And so every day over COVID for months, I put on a wetsuit and I swam aimlessly in this lake, miles every single day, just hoping to continue improving. I came back my junior year, and where a lot of my competitors and my teammates were at this disadvantage because they had taken a few months off, I was at an advantage. I just really picked up where I left off and had, again, a breakout junior season. I came back my senior year, and I knew I could accomplish even more than I had my junior year. And this is when I really set a goal to become a national champion. About halfway through my senior year, I was on pace to do so. I was ranked 3rd in the country. The swimmer who was ranked 1st was a swimmer I had never heard of before. And of course, this was the first time that I became aware of a swimmer named Leah Thomas. And so, unbeknownst to me at the time, this was a male, there was a lot of head scratching going on. You know, this person came out of nowhere, their senior year. They were leading the country by multiple seconds in multiple events. We were just confused who this person was and why we had never heard of Leah. And it wasn't until a few days after these nation-leading times were posted, an article came out disclosing Leah Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to switch over to the women's team. And I read this, and I was so shocked by this information, but truthfully, I felt almost a sense of relief because I was able to look up who Will Thomas was. We saw this was a mediocre male swimmer at best, ranking the year prior 462nd nationally among the men at best. And that's why I say I felt a sense of relief, because I thought the NCAA would see this exactly how I saw it, exactly how anyone would see it. So about 3 weeks before our national championships in March of 2022, the NCAA announced that Leah Thomas would in fact be competing with the women, and there was nothing we could do about it. It was this sense of helplessness Of course, I tried not to let it distract me from my goals and what I had set out to achieve, because again, this was something I had worked my entire life to get to this meet, knowing you're going against someone who, no matter what training you put in, no matter what, how talented you are, there's a certain level of advantage that you can't overcome, no matter what you do. So it almost felt as if we were going into the race with our hands tied behind our back. I can wholeheartedly attest to the tears that I saw from the 9th and 17th place finishers who missed out on being named an All-American by 1 place. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around and there's a 6'4" biological male dropping his clothes fully intact with an exposing male genitalia, watching you and other girls undress. It just felt like betrayal. It felt as if the people who were supposed to be protecting us, the people who were supposed to be ensuring that we're able to compete fairly and safely, were doing everything in their power to take that away from us as female athletes. So that next day of competition was the 200 freestyle, which was the event that Thomas and I competed against each other in. We both swam in the morning, we qualified top 8, we came back that evening and we raced, and ultimately we tied. We went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second. And so we go behind the awards podium and the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself and he says, "Great job, you guys tied. We don't really account for ties, so we're gonna give this trophy to Leah." And so I was, of course, taken aback by this. Leah has to hold the trophy for photo purposes. You can pose with this 6th place trophy, but you'll have to give it back. You will go home empty-handed. Leah takes the trophy home. And that is when I realized I had had enough. I knew the unfair competition was wrong. I knew the locker room aspect was wrong. But when this official reduced everything that I'd worked, again, my entire life for, down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity of a male at the Women's National Championship, that's when I was done waiting for someone else to speak up, because truthfully, up until this point, I was waiting for a coach to say something, a parent, another swimmer, someone within the NCAA, someone with political power, someone else who was supposed to be protecting us to stand up for us. But I realized that's not what we were seeing. And it really hit me that if we as female athletes aren't willing to stick up for ourselves, how can we expect someone else to stick up for us? And that's what really pushed me over the edge into taking a public stance on saying why it's harmful to have men infiltrate into women's sports and women's spaces. This experience and really taking a public stance in just common sense, quite frankly, and the truth has drastically changed my life. I thought that at this point this year I would be in dental school. I ultimately decided to put that off this past year because I see what's at stake if someone doesn't fight for protecting women's sports. And I understand dental school will always be there, and so I've reapplied for dental school this fall. But I still don't know what my future looks like. This is something I constantly pray about. I just ask God to put me where I am needed. But my life, it's been totally flipped upside down.
So there you have it. That's the basic story of how she came into this space and started to realize that nobody was coming to help them, unfortunately. And like I said, that's kind of an indication of society today, but it also maybe was God's plan. She speaks about her faith in God and how he had this plan for her. And I do agree that there's definitely some divine intervention here. She was meant to be in this space. I mean, you could just see it in the way that she's able to speak, the strength that she has, the timing of where she was. You know, all this stuff maybe would not have even happened if it weren't even for the COVID pandemic. In some of her interviews, she talks about how she was really in 2020 coming in, the beginning of 2020, coming into like her best year. And she was really, really feeling like she was in the zone and her hard work had paid off. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, like, what did she say, like 4 days before a big competition was supposed to happen. And it was all canceled. And so luckily where she lived, said she was near a lot of lakes. and she went out and swam in this lake every day, like miles every day, which I can't even comprehend swimming miles, but I mean, that's what swimmers do. So, and it shows that, her dedication to the sport, her love for the sport, her work ethic, right? Which is also shown in her advocacy for women's sports now. And part of the reason why she was meant for this movement, to be the leader, the heroine of this movement. So you see that in this interview a little bit, and then you see where the growth takes her. I'm going to play some clips now from a congressional hearing on this issue. And she gives a great opening speech, which you can find anywhere on YouTube. But I think the really powerful part of this hearing was her reply to this Congresswoman, Summer Lee, who basically calls her a bigot and a transphobe, which is just unreal. And and it's just this woman, this Summer Lee, she is somebody that I would probably not consider a very honorable person. But I'll play the clips. They're kind of in succession, but it skips some parts. But it'll be first to Summer Lee's statement, which calls Riley Gaines transphobe and some other things. And then Riley Gaines' reply to that, which is just chef's kiss. I mean, it's the most verbal backhanded slap to Summer Lee. And it just shows the strength that Riley has. And she even gives a rebuttal during some of the procedural stuff that I think most people wouldn't have had the guts to do. But she does, and it shows why she was meant to be the leader of this movement. So here's those clips. There's kind of like three different parts. There's the Summer Lee's part, and then Riley Gaines' response, and then there's Summer Lee's, she kind of like issues a complaint that Riley Gaines was attacking her personally, even though Riley Gaines points out, I was attacked also. So, it's back and forth the same. And basically Summer Lee ends up dropping her complaint because she was going to lose it. So here's those clips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's disappointing to me that although the title of this hearing implies a much needed discussion, we're likely going to be forced to listen to transphobic bigotry. Because actually protecting female athletes in Title IX is important. Participating in sports provides so many benefits to our young people.
In April of 2023, the Department of Education proposed a rule that, if adopted, would reverse this presumption. Under the proposed rule, women's sports aren't just for women. They're for anyone who simply says they are a woman, unless a particular school can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the Department of Education that keeping a particular team female meets important educational objectives. The new rule mandates that every school in the country must demonstrate the unfairness of male participation on each specific women's team that they offer and develop rules that minimize harm to trans-identified athletes. But what about the harm to us? Who is working to minimize the harm done to female athletes? Let me be perfectly clear. A school that knowingly allows a male athlete to take a spot on a women's team or allows a male athlete to take the field in a women's game is denying a female student athletic opportunity. And that is sex-based discrimination, and it violates Title IX, regardless of what the new regulations might say. It is my sincere hope that members of this committee will take action to stop the Biden administration's illegal and administrative rewrite of Title IX. Of course, there is a place for everyone, regardless of gender identity, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of race or what sports you play. There's a place for everyone to play sports in this country. But unsafe, unfair, and discriminatory practices towards women must stop. Inclusion cannot be prioritized over safety and fairness. And Ranking Member Lee, if my testimony makes me transphobic, then I believe your opening monologue makes you a misogynist. Thank you.
Department of Education. I have, as the saying goes.
Madam Chair, excuse me, I move to have the gentlewoman's words taken down.
The committee will suspend.
Madam Chair, she's engaging in personalities.
Can I just ask how it's fair to be called transphobic?
There's a,
Thing.
I would say men disguising themselves as women are engaging in personalities.
order. Hang on. Order. Let's get a ruling. The chair.
So basically, what ends up happening is this Summer Lee ends up withdrawing her complaint, and they move on with the hearing. But the point I'm trying to show in this clip is that Riley Gaines was not afraid, was not intimidated by a person in Congress. And these people, they tend to wield some authority at least. And the atmosphere is tense and professional and tends to, make people feel a little anxious about, a position they're not comfortable in and maybe be less likely to stand up for themselves. Riley Gaines was not deterred by this position of power. And because deep down, she knew what was right. Not only that, but she was led by the hand of God to, have a passion for knowing what is right, which that's where our only true, guide for true, correct morality comes from, is from this higher power, which is referenced throughout the structure of the United States and its founding. But Riley Gaines was not deterred. And again, this shows why that she was made for this position to protect female sports. She is the heroine of this story. The next clip is going to come from another interview that Riley Gaines did with Dr. Jordan Peterson. Now, Dr. Jordan Peterson tends to take a deeper dive into many interviews that he does. He really pulls out the details from somebody's past or from their story that other interviewers don't tend to do. And so sometimes those things go a little over our heads because he's a very intelligent man and he does this deep, deep dive. But it also offers some interesting perspectives into the story that maybe we hadn't heard before. So that's why I wanted to include some of those clips today. So some context on this interview is this interview came after she went and did a speech at San Francisco University and San Francisco State University rather. And she was speaking on this issue of transgender females in female sports. So men playing women's sports, pretending to be females. And one of the quotes she gave was, "I was physically assaulted by one person. I was struck twice, both times hitting my shoulder and the second strike grazing my face. The rest of the protesters just ambushed and cornered me before I was able to move out with the help of campus police." So besides the fact that you'll see in these clips, campus police was wildly underprepared for this event. At some point she even said she feared for her life. So all these, a lot of these questions from Dr. Jordan Peterson were involving the questions around this event that happened at San Francisco State University in 2023.
Invited by the Leadership Institute, which is an organization that tries to advance, really they uphold the freedom of speech. They try to advance the conservative movement on college campuses. And so I spoke at a Turning Point event. I'll kind of fill you in step by step of what this looked like. I got there. I was supposed to meet the campus police department an hour and a half before the event. We were set to meet at this parking garage and then walk over to the event together. The police never showed up. And so I didn't think much of it. There was still an hour and a half before, so I figured I could just walk over and I'm sure they would make their way over. We would talk about an exit strategy if something were to happen, which I thought I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew this was San Francisco. I knew this was a different environment, which almost excites me, not because I want controversy or because I'm looking for arguments, but because this is an opportunity to get in front of people who don't agree with me. I was more hopeful that they would come with somewhat of an open mind, to which they simply didn't. There were some civil.
Yeah, that was definitely naive. That was definitely naive. But,
I'm
that's
realizing.
excusable and acceptable. While you were going to university campus, did you think you were a conservative?
Sorry, did you say did they think or do I think?
No. Do you? Well, you talked to Turning Point. That's Charlie Kirk's organization.
Right.
It's definitely a conservative organization. Did you have, before all of this, did you consider yourself a political creature? Did you have a political home or an affiliation?
I've always been politically in tune. I've always been pretty up to date and knowledgeable about the different issues we face and what that looks like. And typically my views do align conservative. That's not to say every view. I'm not someone who is going to feel like I have to lean a certain way because that's how I align. That's not me. But I like to be well-versed. I like to be knowledgeable about what's going on. And so I've always been in tune, shall we say, but by no means did I have any sort of political background or any sort of ulterior motive to where I wanted to be in the position that I'm in.
Back to SFU, you're there. The police who are supposed to help you don't show up. And so you're looking forward to this event. And so let's continue walking through the day's events.
So we walk over to the room. It's in a building. It's on the 3rd floor. Very quickly, the room fills up. It's about 50-50 supporters versus protesters in the room. But they very quickly reached the maximum capacity, to which the administrators who were present said, we're not allowing anyone else in the room. And I was cool with that. I understood up at this point that there was some counter events going on, some protests around campus, one of which they organized this big sign-making event where the protesters, they got together and they all made signs and they all walked over together. They orchestrated a sit-in to where they sat in the speech, which again, I understand. That's your right to protest. You have the right to organize. By no means do I think that I'm worthy of stopping that. That's understandable, as long as, again, it's civil and somewhat respectful, right? So I was able to deliver my speech. I talked for probably 40 minutes, and let me reiterate what my speech was. I talked about what it takes to compete at that level, my background, how this is a lifelong journey. I talked about the competition. I talked about the locker room. I talked about the silencing piece, not just from the female athletes, but parents, administrators, medical professionals even. Nothing opinionated. Really, my speech, there's no opinions in it. It's strictly my experience. So I was able to deliver the speech. I answered questions afterwards, to which I was met with lots of questions and oppositions, which I find extremely easy to answer. Whether they take my answer, that's on them, but they're all easy to answer. But it was only after the speech. I just had concluded. It had been probably an hour. Everyone was standing up to leave. And as people were standing to leave, first of all, I should mention, while I was giving my speech, I could hear people outside the building. I could hear them chanting, and it was a large group of people, you could tell. I could hear them chanting things such as trans women are women, or other chants they could come up with. But as I continued my speech, I could hear chants getting closer and closer, to when I concluded, I could hear these people right outside the hallway, to where one side of the hallway would yell, "Trans rights are under attack." The other side of the hallway would yell back, "What do? We fight back." And so I could hear this, which was a bit unnerving, just to know that they were right outside the door. But again, I didn't really let it bother me. That's not something that necessarily shook me at the time. But everyone stood up to leave. All of a sudden, a mob of people enter into the room. They rush into the room. They flicker the lights. They turn the lights off. And this is when they rush to the podium where I was and some other members of the Turning Point chapter were. And this is where we were met with assault and violence. And
so they turned the lights off. So how dark is it in there when the lights are off?
This period is a blur
to me. It all happened so quickly. I felt so disoriented. I felt so jostled. I felt so confused. What is happening? I was told, granted, I never talked with the police before this, but the Turning Point members told me, the police said they're going to lock the doors at a certain time. There should be no problems. We'll be good. So I was under the impression that the doors would be locked, which they were not. So it all just happened so quickly. But yes, they turned the lights off, and it was nighttime outside, so it's pitch black in this room, which of course you have to imagine.
So it's really dark. So that was a sneaky little move.
You have to imagine.
Yeah, the campus police are completely. Of course it's intentional. They know exactly what they're doing, and the campus police are 100% unprepared for any real aggression.
Absolutely.
They're. Yeah. And I mean, to some degree, that's on them and it's on the administration, but it's also outside their normal course of training and activity. They have no idea what to do. So the idea that you're going to be protected by campus police on campus, you can bloody well just forget about that. That's not going to happen. Okay, so now it's dark. And who is it that's rushing you exactly? And how many of them are there?
A mob of trans rights activists, whether that be trans individuals themselves, whether that be people within this LGBTQ community, whether that be someone who just considers themselves an ally to this community. There were so many different, I don't want to say combinations of a person, but there were men dressed as women and women dressed as men and everything in between. So it was very, again, disorienting. It was like, who am I being met with? What is happening? So as the lights are flickering, the lights are on, they're off, an officer approaches me very quickly and she grabs me and she's wearing nothing that indicates she's an officer. And again, I hadn't met her. She never alerted me she was in the room. Her face is covered with a mask. And she tells me very quickly, trying to pull me along as more people are filtering into the room. She says, "Come with me, I'm with the police." And I didn't believe her. Why would I believe her, right? So I was very hesitant. I was reluctant, but truthfully, I had no other choice at this point because we were being rushed at the front of the room. So we kind of navigate out of the room. We're only met with more protesters once we get into the hallway. We couldn't even come out of the door of the classroom because there were so many people filtering in that we had to go out this back door that led us to another classroom to get out that way. To which when we got to the hallway, you look down to the staircase, there's hundreds of people. You look down to the other staircase, of course, which is your exit path to get out of the building, and it's hundreds of people. So ultimately, we had no other choice than this officer led me to another room along that same hallway where I was barricaded for 3 hours, over 3 hours, which was interesting. It was, in those moments, in those hours, you fear for your life, hearing what these people are yelling, hearing the things they want to do to you. An array of things, all of which were violent and vengeful and hateful, and all of the words, of course, in the guys.
Well, let's hear them. What did they tell you?
Some of the things they were yelling
away.
One of the terms they kept using, which I think is so ironic, they kept saying, "We fight back." And I thought about this, and I thought, the day before this event, the press secretary of the Biden administration in a press conference said the words, "Our trans community, they're resilient and they fight back." And so it just kept replaying in my head. Wow, they're using verbatim the same verbiage that Jean-Pierre, whatever her name is using. They were yelling things.
I see. So this is right from the top. That's one of the things that really makes you wonder just exactly what country you're in at a time like that, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
When the people who are threatening you and barricading you in because you're objecting to being, what would you say, subjected to an unfair competition by any reasonable standard, and now you're being mobbed by half-demented lunatics who are directly acting out words that have come from the highest possible state or, federal authorities. Yeah, that's real cute. There's a betrayal for you. That's a nice one.
They were yelling things such as to the officers who were standing outside. They were saying, "You're only protecting her because she's white." They were yelling things, they were yelling things such as, "You shouldn't have come here. You should have known what you were getting yourself into. You knew we would riot. Let her out of that room so we can handle her ourselves."
Are you aware that your browsing data is vpn.com/JordanYT? That's expressvpn.com/JordanYT and get 3 extra months free. expressvpn.com/JordanYT.
What do you think would have happened? What do you think would have happened, just out of curiosity, or what were you imagining would happen if they would have got access to you?
It's a
Do
scary
you have any
thought.
sense, like realistic? Yeah,
It's
yeah,
a scary
I mean,
thought.
we saw what happened to Posey Parker in New
Absolutely.
Zealand, right? I mean, she got mobbed quite nicely, and she had tomato soup doused on her. It never got to the point of, permanent physical violence.
Well, it gets even
right by
better
the
from
mob.
there because inside this room, I could hear these protesters on the outside. And probably 2 hours or so in, maybe 2.5, these protesters, the dean of students shows up. These protesters are trying to negotiate if I make it home safely. They're saying if she wants to make it home, she has to pay us. To which the dean of students is negotiating with them. They all claim
Pay you. What pay you? Meaning what?
I had to pay the mob. That's what they were claiming.
What did you have to pay them?
A couple suggestions
What was the
were
idea?
made. One person suggested, if she wants to make it home safely, she has to pay us $10 each, which is so silly. But
it's not silly. It's kidnapping. It's not silly. It's horrible. It's beyond reproach.
And
it's
so-
or beyond. It's beyond surreal. Oh, that's amazing. And so the dean of students didn't take names and decide that those were some students that could be easily dispensed with and removed from the campus permanently. She decided she'd negotiate with them and play nice, because after all, they were doing was kidnapping you and extortion and engaging in extortion with the threat of violence. That's all they were doing. Whereas you were, complaining about the fact that you'd been subjected to an utterly unfair competition by officials that had betrayed you. That's your crime. Their crime is kidnapping and extortion.
And you'll
Right.
love this.
Cute.
Because after this event, I can talk a little bit about how I actually got out. But after this event, rather than releasing a statement saying we condemn violence or we have to uphold the freedom of speech, the vice president of student affairs, her name is Dr. Jamila Moore, she sent out an email to their student body. In this email, it says, "We applaud our brave students. They were in a situation where they were met with adversity. They were met with, they were put in a very hard circumstance listening to someone who spreads violence. And we applaud their bravery and their peaceful protest." Sent an email to their university describing what I went through as peaceful. And so I read this.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious.
Well, that's a real backhanded compliment that you're a sufficiently terrifying force to have oppressed, 200 rampaging mobsters. You really are quite the monster if you were able to manage that.
Exactly.
While you're being barricaded in a room and essentially kidnapped and extorted. So, that's definitely a compliment to you in the most backhanded possible way. Yeah. Well, it's quite something to watch this, this offer of an extended sense of victimization to the perpetrators themselves, had to undergo all the trauma of having to listen to you describe how you were betrayed by the NCAA and by the Biden administration and by all the virtue signaling dimwits who thought that forcing you and your teammates to compete against a man was actually acceptable and morally justifiable. And so now we're in a situation where your mere attempts to defend yourself are regarded as some variant of hate speech and provocation to violence. Yeah, that's perfectly goddamn delightful. That's a lovely way to think about it. So, I don't suppose you heard from anyone like Kamala Harris, for example, complimenting you on your bravery. I know she sent off a missive a while back to Dylan Mulvaney, letting him know what a brave soul he was for doing whatever the hell it is that he's doing. I don't suppose you heard anything from anybody up in the Democratic authorities complimenting
sure
you
have
on
not.
your bravery.
Absolutely
Yeah,
not.
I bet you haven't.
No.
Yeah.
That is, I'm not holding my breath.
So you can see in these leftist colleges that they, they don't care about free speech. It's actually amazing that she was even allowed to go speak there at all. It speaks to the strength of the conservative organization there. and their ability to have this, have Riley go and be a speaker there. But they were wildly underprepared. They didn't do their due diligence to make sure that, these protests weren't going to get out of hand. I'm sure they knew based on their, the people that they have at their college, that they were going to have a lot of people who were upset. I'm sure they heard from a lot of these people trying to cancel the event before it even happened. And so they knew that something probably was going to go off, and they didn't even have campus police meet with her before the event like they were supposed to. So many, many missteps. And then the whole negotiation with these, well, they were protesters, but ultimately kidnappers who forced her into a room. And then there were no repercussions to that. Here's another clip from Kane and Company. They're with the Daily Wire now. And it does a little bit of background story like we already heard in the last clip, but it also shows the video of the protesters and what they were doing and the negotiations and the comments they were making while she was being held.
And so it hit me when I'm in this room, the exact same verbiage they're using that she used.
Yeah.
And it just was uncanny to me.
So you got basically held hostage. And I saw one clip where they asked to be paid $10 to let you go. This is the worst cartel ever.
Oh, totally. But that piece, the part where they were trying to negotiate money for me, that went along a lot longer than the clip showed. They genuinely were yelling at me, if you want to leave here, you have to pay us. If you want to make it home safely, it's only fair that you pay us, because they claimed, if our university paid you to be here, you have to pay to leave, which, let me be clear, let me set the record straight. The university did not pay me to be there. The university clearly did not want me there.
So you can see how many people were outside that room. That was just in the hallway. And like she said, it was shorter than it actually went on for. The last interview clip, I have 2 clips left, part of which you saw in the beginning of this episode, but this is from the Joe Rogan podcast. This interview was also done about a year ago, and I like Joe Rogan. I don't really watch a lot of his stuff because it's very long form, and we only have so many hours in a day, but I do watch some of the clips, and I find it interesting, his kind of balanced perspective that he has. His questions are, he actually reminds me a lot of Donald Trump, what Donald Trump does, because he's very introspective, and like he really pays attention to the person, and he's genuinely curious about their story and what they've been through. And he's curious about the facts behind the story and learning. Like it's an adventure in learning for Joe Rogan. I think that's why he's so relatable, because we're all in that position, right? We're all constantly learning, constantly growing, and his ability to get out the details in a different way than Dr. Jordan Peterson. His is more the factual details and the personal nature to the story. So here's the clip from Joe Rogan podcast.
Now, again, based off of social media, he is engaged to another man who claims to be a woman. So 2 men, but they call themselves lesbians. So who knows? But yes.
But at the time. So
yeah.
If you're on that team, you're a woman and you have a biological male who's intact, who's having sex with women, walking around naked in the locker room with women. And if you're uncomfortable with that, you should educate yourself.
You
and
said
learn how to use she, her pronouns and accept defeat.
You said it.
To this person that's not a woman.
You said it.
And the whole idea behind Title IX was supposed to be to protect women's sports. It's supposed to be to have a place where women can compete fairly against women.
Yeah.
And because of this insane cult that 45% of the country's in, or whatever it is, you have to deal with this literal mental patient in a woman's sport dominating, and everyone's cheering.
Yes.
And everyone around it that's watching it is upset. All the parents, probably on both teams.
Of course.
All the women that are competing with this man. And the whole world's like, yay, diversity. And you must feel like you're in a fucking movie or something.
Well, I'll tell you, really what had thrusted me over the edge into no longer being willing to lie, ultimately, is he and I raced in the 200 freestyle. This is the day after he swam the 500 freestyle and won a national title, beat out Olympians, beating out American record holders, right? Keep in mind, these aren't scrubs. They're the most impressive and accomplished female swimmers this world has ever seen. And again, he beat them all by body lengths. 1 second might not sound like a lot of time, but in the sport of swimming, again, measured down to the 100th of a second, 1 second is significant. He beat the entire nation of women by almost 2 full seconds. Even the time he went last year would have beat every girl in the country this past season by nearly 2 full seconds, making him the first man to win a Division I NCAA women's title, trailblazer. But the second day of competition, the day after this, he and I race in the 200 freestyle. So, look, we get on the blocks, dive off, swim 8 laps of freestyle, touch the ball at the end. I look up at the scoreboard, and almost impossibly enough, Joe, we had gone the exact same time, meaning, of course, we had tied, which is it's incredibly embarrassing for a 6'4" man to not even be able to beat like a 5'5" female. But again, going a minute and 40-ish seconds and not even 1/100th separated us. You can't tell me that's not divine intervention. But tied, we get out of the water. We go, you can see here, we both went 143.40. Not one of us going 143.39 or 143.41, tying. Get out of the water, go behind the awards podium. The NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself. Thomas, who is towering over me, right, 6'4", and this official looks at both of us and says, "Great job, you two. But you tied, and we only have 1 trophy, so we're going to give the trophy to Leah. Sorry, Riley, you don't get one." My
Jesus Christ.
Heart rate was still high, having just competed. My adrenaline was still pumping. And so the first thing that I thought ended up being the first thing that I said. And the first thought that I had was just what you had just said, right? Like, isn't this everything that Title IX was passed to prevent from happening? What do you mean you're going to give the trophy to the man in the women's 200 freestyle? I asked the question that no one dared ask all season. And I said, why? Which, of course, he didn't have an answer as to why. They didn't give him a script of what to say when someone asks you the dreaded question of why. And so his first excuse he came up with, he's stumbling on his words, and he's, we're actually just doing this in chronological order, he said. And so I said, okay, do you mean alphabetical? Because G comes before T. Otherwise, I literally have no idea what you're being chronological about, right? We tied. So again, what's your rationale here? And finally, he realized that he didn't have a justification. He didn't have an answer for this. And so, and I actually appreciate his honesty, this is when his face changed. He looked sad. His voice changed. I could tell he didn't even believe what he was about to say. But this official looked at me and said, "Riley, I am so sorry, but we have been advised as an organization that when photos are being taken, it's crucial that the trophy's in Leah's hands. Again, you can pose with this one, but you have to give yours back. Leah takes the trophy home. You go home empty-handed, end of story. We can eventually mail you one."
Oh my God.
Is what they said. So it was like that moment when I felt guilty at that point. I felt guilty for participating in the farce. I felt guilty for even getting in the water at this point. And so it kind of hit me. I won't say I was necessarily cowering, because I didn't feel like that to me. I wasn't necessarily scared to approach the topic. I just thought someone else would. I thought a coach would say something. I thought some other swimmer. I thought someone with political power, someone within the NCAA quite honestly, I thought someone's dad would come down there and yank this man out of our locker rooms. But it was in that moment where we were standing on the podium, myself included. I'm standing on the podium, and we're clapping, and we're smiling, and we're cheering, and it hit me. I'm like, what in the world are we clapping for? Because, I mean, really what we're applauding is our own erasure, our own demolition. And so it was right then and there that, again, like a slap across the face, I was like, how in the world can we as women, as female athletes, expect someone to stand up for us if we aren't even willing to stand up for us? Like, this has to come from us. So again, I knew all season the unfair competition was wrong. I knew all season that the locker room aspect was wrong. I knew that the silencing that we were facing from our universities, I knew all of that was wrong. We all did. But it wasn't until this official reduced everything that we had worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity of a man at the expense of our own. That's really when I decided that I couldn't continue being silent.
Wow. And how powerful is that, right? That's when she had the moment, the inspiration, I would say, maybe even from God himself telling her, this is your time. This is when you need to stand up and fight. You are the person, you are the place, and this is the time for this movement to start. And I don't think it could have been any more perfectly timed, because just where we were in the world and the country, people are starting to get tired of the Biden administration already. Their failures, their lack of transparency, their lack of the ability to give answers to the people. I think the timing was right. And so that's why she was inspired at this moment to take a stand. And she was the right person, and it was the right time, clearly now. And now I just want to leave you with one last clip. This is from the TPUSA event. Turning Point USA is started by Charlie Kirk, who is a great leader in the conservative movement. And he just was another grassroots organization who was in the right place. He was the right person at the right time. He's very intelligent, very well read, very well self-educated, as he points out numerous times. He didn't go to college, but he's self-educated. And she spoke there. This is post-election for Donald Trump. So this is very recent. And just to give you an example of how far she's come in the public speaking arena. I mean, she's given hundreds, if not close to 1,000, well, maybe not that much, but hundreds of speeches all around the country. She continues to speak regularly. And so she's obviously gotten very good at it. And this was probably her intended mission, at least for a long time, until this issue is no longer, which I guess maybe she'll be happy to be out of a job then, because then her, the solution will have come. But I'm sure she'll find her feet somewhere else, because the left never ceases their lunacy. So anyways, this is her speaking at the TPUSA event.
The Wall Street Journal actually said that the whole national debate of allowing men into women's sports was the sleeper issue of the election. We saw how it affected the outcome of the presidential election, but also it played a key part in these important Senate races, like in Pennsylvania, Bob Casey and David McCormick, or in Ohio, Bernie Moreno and Sherrod Brown. I was thrilled, I think back to this summer, when President Trump's platform was released, and issue number 17 in big bold letters said, "No men and women's sports." I would crack up watching him on the campaign trail. When he was directly asked, people would ask him, how are you going to fix this issue? And he would almost kind of grimace or laugh, because, again, it's kind of like a South Park episode, the visual of it, or like a Babylon Bee headline or an SNL skit. And he would just say, I'm going to ban it, emphatically. And that's the type of leadership and moral clarity that we need. He has vowed on day one in office, he will reinforce and uphold Title IX's original intent, which now it's personal for President Trump.
So what a great speaker she's really become in this movement, and a really awesome piece that we have now added to our movement in protecting conservative values in this country. And so, like, the part about Donald Trump that I want to say is, like she said before, he promised he was going to make it happen, and promises made, promises kept. Donald Trump did follow through on that, did pass sign an executive order, rather, basically just reaffirming Title IX. I mean, these are not things that he's changing. These are things that were there already. The Biden administration changed. The left had no problem with the changes he made. Now they're going to fight because Donald Trump's just trying to change it back to its original meaning. And they'll try to fight, as they always do, because, like I say, I would normally call them hypocrites, but they have no values. So you can't be a hypocrite if you don't have values to begin with. Anyways, I know this was a long episode, but there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to show you guys. Maybe clip through some of it or watch it on 2x speed or whatever. But I appreciate you guys showing up. Riley Gaines is the heroine of female sports, modern female sports. And I hope that she continues to be a driving force in this issue because it really is one of the key issues of our time. I want to thank you for joining this episode today and watching or listening, however you took it in. And I would appreciate you sharing, liking, subscribing, and come back on Monday for another episode. As always, don't forget to go out and volunteer for something important and spark the conversation.